Alright, man, peace. So, brothers, the last time we covered the character currently known as T.O., aka Terrell Owens, the former superstar wide receiver of the San Francisco 49ers, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Buffalo Bills. He was attempting to stage a coup on Stephen A. Smith and using Colin Kaepernick as the piece on the chessboard to do so. It's very obvious to me that Terrell Owens suffers from quite a few psychological issues, one of them being narcissism. He's always about himself. Every time he speaks on various topics, it's always in relation to himself. And another thing that he suffers from is a victimization mentality, which is very common amongst liberal Negroes, which he is beyond a shadow of a doubt. What the vast majority of liberal Negroes have in common is a wanton entitlement issue. They think everything is supposed to go their way. They believe that they deserve everything. And whenever they're being reprimanded, it's never because they're wrong or incorrect in something. It's an issue that the authority figure has with them. And unfortunately for Terrell Owens, because he was not raised in a household by a man, he has issues with being reprimanded. And he's always going to try to blame it on something else. So as of right now, especially in light of the quote-unquote woke renaissance that we're going through, he's going to continue to try to use the pro-black reasoning for why he was quote-unquote ran out of the NFL at the young age of 39 or 40 or however old he was. He's going to claim that it was due to racism that he no longer is in the NFL, even though he's closer to 50 than he is to 30. So anyway, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Welcome back to TMZ Sports. Michael J. Babcock with Robert Littell. What's up, Robert?
In the house.
Oh, I left the L out. Robert L. Littell.
L. Littell.
I like it. You're L and I'm J now. I like it. Let's talk about Terrell Owens. Terrell Owens. This is really shocking. It surprised me when I heard when Terrell said this to me. But T.O., one of the greatest football players, undeniably, of all time, says that he experienced systematic racism while he was a member of the San Francisco 49ers. And he believes because of the color of his skin, he was essentially shipped out of town before he should have been.
Let me say this very quickly. Is it possible that Terrell Owens was quote unquote shipped out of San Francisco before he allegedly should have been because of the color of his skin? Who knows? Maybe if he was a famous white running back like Christian McCaffrey or a tight end like Rob Gronkowski and he had the same personality, they would not have shipped him out of town for the way in which he constantly was trying to go back and forth with Jeff Garcia. Maybe that's the case, but I'm not quite sure if he has enough credibility because of what we know about Terrell Owens, particularly in light of how things have gone in other locations in his career. It's nothing against the brother whatsoever. I'm not saying that he did not experience quote-unquote systemic racism in San Francisco or many of these other locations. But sometimes we have to look within ourselves and ask ourselves, is there something that I can do to try to avoid some of this stupid shit that goes on? Because when we use the term systemic racism, please understand what that's talking about. That's talking about the maintenance of rulership by a certain caste or a certain class. So if we truly want to overcome quote unquote systemic racism, that means that we have to insulate ourselves and reject a lot of the global ideologies that are being promoted and pushed towards the so-called black community. That's why I stated in one of the George Floyd videos that in light of what's going on right now, it basically is a red herring as well as a Trojan horse mechanism to bring in globalism. And there's no scenario where we win. I'm talking about so-called black men. There's no scenario where we win here. And antagonizing the powers that be is only going to make them redirect their channels. Right now, these major corporations and conglomerates are in full defense mode. They're trying to wait out the storm of this quote-unquote woke renaissance so that they can go right back to business. They're never going to empower the so-called heterosexual black man. The demographics that are going to reap the benefits of what's going on right now, the chaos that's being pushed and propagated throughout society, are going to be the feminist woman, the lesbian woman, the bisexual woman, the transgender, the homosexual man. Not the heterosexual black man. That is why those demographics are quote-unquote marching in the name of Black Lives Matter, because they know that Black Lives Matter is really about homosexuality and the quote-unquote Luciferian or real rainbow coalition. But just getting back to Terrell Owens. Maybe Steve Mariucci was a quote-unquote racist. Maybe he was. There are a lot of NFL coaches going back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s who were ardent racists and who just understood that the so-called black athlete is the best athlete in the world and have to be able to use him. But Terrell Owens utilizes so much hyperbole that it's difficult to take him seriously. I need to hear other so-called black players say the same thing. Now, if Jerry Rice comes out and says something, if other prominent so-called black players on the team at that time that Steve Mariucci was coaching come out and say something, then maybe that will give it more credence. But here's what I do know. On Jerry Rice Day, which was Jerry Rice's, I believe, last home game in San Francisco, there was a receiver who set the record for most catches in a game, and it wasn't Jerry Rice. It was this dude right here, Terrell Owens. And the head coach for the 49ers was Steve Mariucci.
Oh, I had a conversation with Terrell. We were actually talking about a march that T.O. put together on behalf of Colin Kaepernick.
And we'll be covering this march later on in the video. Nothing against Terrell Owens, but this is another attention grab by him.
And while we were talking, he caught me off guard with what he says was a pretty bad experience under Coach Mariucci in San Francisco. Check this out.
I felt like I got blackballed out the league. I still continued to play, but because I was outspoken, because of who I was, I wasn't allowed the opportunity to play.
Or maybe you just got removed from the NFL because you got injured and you were around 40 years old. Brother, I have news for you. Yes, maybe you could be a 5th or 6th wide receiver on various teams. Or maybe even a 3rd or 4th wide receiver because you are physically, you're a marvel. No doubt about that. But how about making room for all the 20 and 21 and 22-year-old brothers who are coming into the league every year who are trying to make their way? It wasn't like you were Sterling Sharp who only played 7 years and you got ran out of the NFL because you were outspoken. You were in the league from the mid-90s all the way to like 2010, 2011. You played 16, 17 years, dude. You were not blackballed out of the NFL.
Play right now, given the opportunity.
But why would you want to?
Because I was outspoken, because of who I was, and because of some of the coaches that said things behind closed doors and got in the ears of these owners.
You were outspoken. That's why you were blackballed out of the NFL. I struggle to think of all the situations in which Terrell Owens was speaking up for the quote-unquote black community. I'm not saying that he never spoke up about race. There may have been situations where he did, where he alleged that there was a racial issue, but I'm pretty sure that it revolved around him and not a systemic issue. And that's what I mean when I say that Terrell is a narcissist. Everything always has to come back to him. And he also clearly has, daddy issues.
Why I wasn't able to really continue on with my career. Like I said, and to me, that was systemic racism. Like I said, I experienced it when I was in...
Bruh, systemic racism is when the same thing is happening to everyone within a certain demographic because of their race. So once again, I would have to hear almost every so-called black player who played under Mariucci say that they felt like the same thing happened to them, that they were removed from the 49ers earlier than they should have been because of their race.
Go under Coach Mariucci, bro, I experienced it. Trust me.
Yeah.
I experienced it. Nobody knew my character. There's a lot of media that portrayed me a certain way to where now even people think that I'm this bad person.
Well, there are also a lot of your former teammates who say, relatively unsavory things about you as well.
I'm a character. I'm selfish. Yeah. All these things.
Well, you do exhibit traits of both of those things, that you're a character and you're selfish. All of a sudden, you're Mr. Pro-Blackity now. You're leading marches. Are you doing that because that's really your passion, or are you doing that because that's the wave right now? A lot of people are doing this shit because it's the wave. All of a sudden, you see so many liberal black females on the internet. And I tell you brothers about this all the time, about their racialist altar. Every time there's a depiction of a so-called black man being arrested, there's females in the comment section, oh, this is terrible how they're doing our brothers. The vast majority of the time that black men have been arrested by the cops for crimes they didn't do, the cops were called to them by a black woman. I'm just being real about that. They talk about Karen all the time, but what about Keisha? Keisha calls the cops on her man also, just because she's upset or, whatever, whether it's child support or what have you. So these situations are nuanced. But just getting back to Terrell Owens, He said wearing the George Floyd t-shirt, a lot of these guys are trying to conjure the energy of the spirit of George Floyd so that they can get back to some level of relevance.
At the end of the day, man, I knew who I was, and I just kept moving forward.
Yeah, I think what he's getting at, I don't think he has, like, specifics, that he has. Can't, like, point to one instance.
Well, if you cannot at least point to one instance, everything else that you say is invalid. For you to say that you're a quote-unquote victim of systemic racism, you should have multiple incidents that you can line up, especially if you're going to accuse the NFL of being systemically racist, or a coach of practicing systemic racism. You have to say, this is what Steve Mariucci used to do to all the black players. Not, this is what he did to me, or this is what this team did to me. That's not a sign of systemic racism. That's a sign of a victimization mentality.
What he's saying is that throughout his career, starting in San Francisco, he was stereotyping. He had a reputation that coaches and others, and as black men, oftentimes, if we are outspoken, if we stand up for ourselves, if we just don't fall in line, a lot of times people take that as being selfish.
There's some credence to that, and that's the reason why I state that corporate America is not for the so-called black man. But unfortunately for the so-called black man, he does not view himself as being different or special. He's been convinced that he should be trying to blend in with everybody else. So we have to embrace our specialness and go out on the prairie into the wilderness and search out new land, new territory for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why Kyrie Irving said what? He said maybe we should form our own league. And all the wokety wokes got upset with Kyrie. Why is that? Because deep within their heart, they just want to be validated and justified by their God, white daddy.
Arrogant, not a team player. And I think in T.O.'s mind, he believes that those narratives that were put on him cost him at the back end of his career. And you could probably say that T.O. was having a good year this last year before he got hurt, and then he never got an opportunity to play again after that.
I have news for you. There are many examples of prominent athletes who are still competing at a relatively high level into their late 30s who get moved out of the way. Green Bay is in the process of doing that right now with Aaron Rodgers. This dude, Aaron Rodgers, has normally anywhere from a 5 to a 7 to 1 touchdown to interception ratio. They just drafted a new quarterback to replace him, and they're trying to incrementally push Aaron Rodgers out of the playbook and off the team. If he was a so-called black quarterback with the mentality of Terrell Owens, he'd be crying racism, and you'd have a lot of other people who'd probably be crying racism as well. That's a part of life, not just of sports, but of life. There's a saying that history is the chronicling of replacement.
I think we might have talked about this before, but I think it is interesting, and it's worth investigating how people react to certain players. I think take someone like Rob Gronkowski, for instance. When he does his antics, if that's the right word, they're celebrated. And
well, I brought this up in the past, but I would not quite call that systemic racism. I probably call that more perceptual racialism. It's just how people perceive things differently based on race. But there's no doubt about it that when Rob Gronkowski does a lot of wild and crazy shit, they say, oh, look at Rob. He's that wild and zany guy. But when Ezekiel Elliott pulls the bra top off of some chick that he was already banging or was about to bang, people accuse him of being a quasi-rapist. That's just a part of this society. And if the so-called black man wants to escape this, we have to form our own society. This notion that we should not have to form our own nation or get our own land and institute our own code of conduct and laws, that we should not have to do that, that's just not reasonable. Every so-called race has a homeland and a home territory that they understand is a foundation for them. It creates foundational principles for them. It creates a resource for them to refer back to for culture, for history, for lineage, etc. And we do not have that. And as long as we do not accept that we need that back, we're always going to feel lost here in this land, and therefore we're always going to search out the validation of the so-called white man. Once again, that's why they're constantly trying to pit black against white, because that dichotomy is only in existence because of the codependency of those two polarities. You can't have white without black and vice versa. So as long as so-called black people continue to call themselves by that name of black, you're always going to need white validation. So-called white validation.
it's funny when he does it, but I think when you have someone like T.O., right, he gets labeled as a troublemaker, and I definitely...
This is T.O. leading his protests. It looks like a relatively high percentage of so-called black people in this protest, maybe as high as 10-15%. Also, brothers, please understand that a lot of the Caucasian members of these protests are actors. There are ads being placed on Craigslist for actors to show up at a lot of these protests who are trying to make their way into the industry, believe it or not.
There is a double standard here, and I think that's probably what he was talking about. T.O., after we did the story, after we put it on the TMZ Sports website, Robert, T.O. actually sent me a message, and he said he wanted to clarify one thing, that his beef was not with the San Francisco 49ers and their current ownership, Jed York. T.O. actually said he had a conversation with Jed York, and he expressed to him that you and I, we are cool. I think T.O.'s issue was specifically with Coach Steve Mariucci. Now, I have really tried hard to get in touch with Mooch, but to this point, for some reason, for whatever reason, he has not responded. He has not given his side of the story. I hope.
Well, right now, the so-called white man is running and hiding. That's why I call them the pro-black mafia, because they're not going to stop until their demands are met. It's not just about agreement. It's about capitulation and acknowledgement of whatever perceived racism somebody, quote unquote, suffered through. They're not going to stop until they get the apology and complete subservience in every way, shape, and form. So Mariucci better keep running.
I think he does, because look, it's a big claim, and I think
to me the only reason why he should feel compelled to speak up for himself is if other black players start coming out and saying, yes, Terrell Owens is correct. Mariucci was practicing systemic racism in the locker room, and this is how it affected all the black players. The people like J.J. Stokes and, some of these other guys who happen to be so-called black on the team, Dana Stubblefield or whoever, if they start coming out and speaking about it, Jerry Rice, then yes, that would bring more credence to what T.O. is saying.
When a claim of racism is made, you would like to hear from the other person and have their side of the story. So hopefully that happens. Very interesting to hear T.O. say that, though, because like we said, this guy is one of the best 2, 3, 4 wide receivers of all time. And to hear that he believes, at least, that he experienced racism while in the NFL, it's scary.
Right, but does he also have an issue with Andy Reid and Bill Parcells? Were they practicing systemic racism as well? Or maybe it was just him. Okay, so brothers, now we've jumped ahead to the coverage of the Terrell Owens-led, quote-unquote, Black Lives Matter protest. I'm not quite sure if that was an official so-called Black Lives Matter protest, because normally they're led by lesbian women. Maybe Terrell Owens does have some true associations with that organization, and they're just using him for his star power. Because once again, all you have to do is go on their website and they tell you what they're actually about. Maybe Terrell Owens has never read what's going on the website, which would not surprise me at all, because pretty much anything that guarantees him attention, Terrell is going to sign on to and sign up with and side with. So anyway, let's see what transpired at the Terrell Owens quote-unquote Black Lives Matter protest.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Evan. Michael J. Babcock is here. What's up? Robert LaSalle.
Sitting in the house.
An NFL Hall of Famer was leading a Black Lives Matter protest in West Hollywood, and we got the video. Take a look at Terrell Owens, who's been very outspoken on social media over the past couple of days, weeks, and months, especially.
Bros, I guarantee you that at least 15 to maybe as high as 30% of the people in this crowd are Caucasian actors. And maybe some of the black people are actors as well. Who knows? But I promise you, at the very least 15% and maybe as high as 30% of the people in that crowd are just actors who responded to some ad on Craigslist. And most likely, who knows, just wanted to meet Terrell Owens. The real question is, once again, what is the end game here for Terrell Owens? Does he really think that he's going to get involved with some type of social reform, or is he going to try to parlay this into some relevance in his sports talk career? As I stated, when he tried to buck up against Stephen A. Smith's assertions about Kaepernick, when Kaepernick did not abide by the stipulations of the NFL at that so-called tryout, it was very clear to me that T.O. was just trying to get into a back and forth with Stephen A. Smith because he was jealous of Stephen A. Smith. He wants his spot on TV. but deep down he knows that he's never going to get it. And that's the thing, once again, not to digress back to the black liberal topic, but they just don't understand. Their trolling techniques are not going to, quote unquote, unify America, which they claim is their goal. All their trolling techniques are going to do is make the Caucasians, who they claim they love so much, go deeper and deeper into their own shell. And that's why I say that this electoral season, quote unquote electoral season, come October and November, is going to be filled with more vitriol than ever before. And it would not surprise me if there are a multitude of people who get killed while standing in line at the polls, especially if they're dumb enough to acknowledge who they're going to vote for before they get to the voting booth. It would not surprise me at all. It would not surprise me if there were some drive-by shootings, especially in certain neighborhoods that are majority black, where you have conservative Caucasians or ardently racist Caucasians drive by a voting line filled with black people and just spray up the whole line. Wouldn't shock me at all. Wouldn't shock me at all, because that's the environment that has been created because of the desperation of the Marxist, aka the Democratic Party, to pull Trump out of the White House seat. For whatever reason, they're exceedingly desperate. So that tells me that they have plans that they want to actionize as soon as possible. But anyway, just getting back to Mr. Terrell Owens, who knows? Maybe he's Boulay. That's highly possible. Because most of these prominent celebrity black entertainers, so-called black entertainers that you see stomping for Black Lives Matter, are actually just pawns to the Democratic Party, because Black Lives Matter is a front organization for the Democratic Party. So we might find out more things about T.O. down the line.
The killing of George Floyd in Minnesota. He's been very loud on social media about that. Well, now he's taken his action to the streets. There was a big march through West Hollywood on Saturday, and leading the pack was Terrell Owens. He grabbed the bullhorn and he was leading the...
And brothers, let me also say this, as I've always said, Marxism is just Luciferianism. That fist in the air salute, and I'll be delving into this in the series that I do on Black Lives Matter, is just an allusion to the old Canaanite gods of Baal and Anat.
Let's take a look.
What do we want? Justice! Where? Now! Take hard night!
Breonna Taylor was sacrificed to the Mother Goddess. All three, or at this point, all four of the notable figures that are getting promoted for being killed by the police across the country and across the world were ritualistically removed. Ahmaud Arbery for the Skull and Bones, or the Order of Death. George Floyd was removed as a personification of the Great Black Bull, or the Apis Bull, was known as the Tauroctony in the Mithraic Mystery School system. Breonna Taylor was removed for the Mother Goddess on what they call Friday the 13th. And now you also have this cat, Rayshard Brooks, whose removal was promoted. It wasn't planned, but it was promoted because it occurred on the 12th of June, which of course is an allusion to 666, or the Brotherhood of Saturn, the Order of Saturn. So that's why these events are getting pushed and promoted. There are so many bigger problems that the so-called black community has overall, but those issues are not going to be paid issuance to because they stand in the way of globalism. And that's all this is about. It's a quote-unquote one world government, which is pretty much already in effect. They're just in the end stages of it.
I mean, it's good to see athletes, entertainers out there with the protesters, because it's easy for them to sit at home and not do anything. You know, they don't have to do this. I mean, that's part of the kind of the luxury of being an entertainer.
Well, actually, Terrell Owens does have to do this because he has to maintain relevance by any means necessary. I'm not going to say that the brother's broke or anything like that. He might still have funds from his playing career, but I promise you, he has to do things to keep himself in the eye of the public so that he can maintain, you know, whatever level of status or notoriety he needs to keep money coming in.
They're an athlete, a star in any way. So to see someone like Terrell Owens, and we've seen a lot others, and not just out there on the bullhorn, letting it be known, you know.
And this guy on the bicycle, right to the right, if you can see it, he has the rainbow fanny pack in the back. So he's wearing he's wearing a pink wife beater with a pink scarf around his neck. I'm not quite sure if you guys could see it. It was earlier on in the video. He's to the far right of the screen right now. But once again, they're only marching for their own agenda. That being to push the homosexual, feminist, transgender movement. They use the energy created by the so-called black man and parlay that over to their own cause. Because we are the #1 energy creators because of the natural spirit and soul energy that we have within us, given to us from the Most High. No other group, demographic, or entity can create energy out of nowhere like the so-called black man can. What we call quote-unquote black culture, or pop culture per se. Dancing, entertainment, singing, athletics, what you call swag, being cool, or what have you. But what they've done is they've separated the so-called black man from his scholarly aspect. At one time we represented the great teacher on the earth as well, but no more. Because the so-called black man has been separated from any affinity with being a knowledge base. Now we just want to be cool and swagged out.
Because in a way, I don't even know if they understand this. In a way, they end up protecting the protesters because, nobody wants to do anything with Terrell Owens there. You know what I mean?
It's a good point. It's a good point because the celebrity presence draws even more cameras and more attention. And
there goes this guy again. You see him here with the pink. He's to the right. He has the pink tank top on, or the pink quote-unquote white beater on. Once again, a lot of people might say, well, why is that an issue? It's an issue because this started off as a so-called black issue that we wanted to call attention to, allegedly. But I knew what it was going to be converted over to. And our people fall for this over and over and over again. And that's why I make these videos for a lot of brothers. Many times people ask me, how come I don't upload on YouTube as much? That's because my platform was never created for the masses. The things that I say was always intended for a certain level of so-called black man. So that level of so-called black man could grasp what I was saying, and we could confer and build from there and go from there, and cats teach their own. A lot of people are never going to understand what's going on, no matter how much empirical evidence and data you provide. They're just here to be proverbial pawns on the chessboard. That's all they are. That's all they're ever going to be. And you have to recognize people for who they are and not try to change them. In the same way that you cannot turn a hoe into a housewife, you cannot turn a pawn into a king. And with all that being said, I will start making videos for YouTube as well, but not to the level or with the level of detail that the videos on Patreon are going to have.
It comes protection. The other thing I was...
There goes that dude with that with that pink white beater on. Terrell Owens supposed to say, you know what, man, why don't you go have a nice day? You and your boyfriend go ride around the corner. You can ride down Sunset Boulevard and start your own protest. Right here, we're trying to make sure that the so-called black man is the center of attention and that we can get certain things done. But that's never going to be said because, once again, the Black Lives Matter movement is more geared towards homosexuality and lesbianism than it is the problems of the so-called black man.
Was concerned about jokingly is that this march went very long. It went from Pan Pacific Park all the way through West Hollywood. Somebody I know that was there was like, this was a long march. Terrell Owens is in incredible shape. And I think he's in too good a shape. And I was told it was moving very fast for a long period of time. And I'm concerned that the marchers who were with him couldn't keep up because he's in such good shape. But we saw by the end, it was actually growing and growing and growing. By the time it got to the end, there were thousands and thousands of people that were keeping up with Terrell Owens. And what I thought was it was an amazing scene there.
Yeah, he's got to remember that there's like normal people that are like world-class athletes. But yeah, no, I agree with you guys. I think it's a good thing. It gets more attention. I think,
which is what he's looking for, as much attention as possible.
Everybody, everyone is on their best behavior because there's going to be a lot of media attention, more cameras will be there. So there's a positive thing. There's no other way to look at it.
Babcock said it's a positive thing. There's no other way to look at it. Well, he knows right now with this Black Lives Matter, a.k.a. woke black mafia movement going on, he has to be on his P's and Q's as well. The reason why he said there's no other way to look at it is because he thinks of it a different way. He thinks of it basically as the masses of so-called white people being shamed into conforming to the whims of the liberal blacks. And there is going to be a snapback to this. And, that's why I discuss these things with you, brothers, so that we can, comprehend things before they occur, because there is going to be a snapback. A lot of these false pretenses, as I see them, by corporations are really just to set up the so-called black man, to make him feel comfortable, have him believe that he's being brought into the fold, so that when they bring down their real reforms, they feel more welcoming. The main thing that they're going to try to bring down is mandatory vaccinations. But what they need is to have a figurehead in the White House who's going to be the face of it. If they don't bring it down right now, say, for example, if Trump wins the 2020 elections, certainly Andrew Cuomo in 2024 is going to be the face of mandatory vaccinations and supreme globalism. But I'll be covering him in far greater depth in an interview that he had on the CBS Sunday Morning News, which was very interesting. But just getting back to the point of this video, a lot of so-called black men are raised to be victims, to blame this and blame that. And this society certainly shows us no favors whatsoever. But we have more than enough resources to become relatively independent, to count on one another. But that's the most difficult thing for us to do because of our lack of culture. We have a lack of culture, so therefore we have a lack of trust. And to me, that was on full display in the segment where Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharpe were discussing Kyrie Irving's claims that blacks should form their own league. The way in which Shannon Sharpe was speaking was so slave-minded, it was disgusting. And it shows you why so-called black businesses, for the most part, fail. Because many so-called black people have this sense of entitlement where their attitude is, I have to be a consumer. Nigga, who are you to think that you should be a producer? Who are you that you think that you should be able to get rich off of my money? I'll go give my money to the Asian man, to the East Indian man, the white man, the African man, but I'm not giving money to you. Who the fuck are you? So that's what we have to move past. Those are the major issues. The major issues are not the cops killing niggas. I mean, that's a major issue if you're a black criminal. If you're a black criminal, someone with the criminal mindset, then yes, you have to be worried about a cop trying to kill you when he should just be trying to arrest you. Now, for a regular so-called black man, that's a lower level problem for us. You never know what could happen. You could run into a skinhead or somebody else who just has an issue with so-called black men, a KKK member who's infiltrated the police force, and now we have a problem. But that's nowhere near the primary issues that we have. But Terrell Owens, he's going to try to parlay what's going on with the woke renaissance, as I call it, into more attention for himself. Antonio Brown, he's another person with a victimization mentality. He might start to claim that he's been the victim of systemic racism and get more involved with the Black Lesbians Matter movement. We'll see. So peace.